Animals have always been sources of fear and mystery.
Bill just got bitten by a wolf.
The werewolf is just pure id, and there's something of the savage beast attacking.
The primal, unrestrained, animalistic side of human nature. Obviously, sex is part of that.
It works completely as a horror movie in that it has many great scares in it, and it's moody.
She's ours now.
But it's so clearly also having fun with the genre at the same time.
It's the only way to get rid of the damn things. They're worse than cockroaches.
Howling speaks for itself. It's a classic little movie.
I knew I shouldn't have left that broad back here.
I think it's a really good horror film with really good special effects.
Dan Blatt was a producer that I knew from New World Pictures, Roger Corman's company, and he had gotten involved in this project, The Howling, which was based on a book by Gary Brandner. And Dan had helped put it together at Avco Embassy. You know, they just wanted something they could sell, and they knew it was a high concept. There hadn't been a werewolf movie in a long time, so it was, you know, considered a very commercial idea.
Their niche was kind of making low-budget drive-in pictures. During the Howling period, they were sort of the House of Horrors. It was originally developed by another director, a guy named Jack Conrad, who gets a producer credit. And he had optioned the book and written a screenplay of his own that I guess he had managed to set up at Avco Embassy.
In Hollywood, we euphemistically call it creative differences with the director, and it wasn't working out. Dan and I talked about it and said, well, you know, Joe Dante would be great. I was really good friends with Joe. And so I called him up and I said, look, we have this werewolf movie, and I think we're going to you know, make a change, you know, in the directing department, and would you be interested?
I had done 1.5 movies by this point, so I mean, it wasn't exactly you know, a great coup for them to get me. But on the other hand, I knew Bob Ramey, the guy who was running Avco Embassy at the time, because he had worked for Roger Corman as in publicity. Since we knew each other, and I was extremely cheap, I was taken off of the movie that I was going to do, which was Jaws 3 People Zero at Universal, which looked like it was, for various reasons, about to fall apart. And I sort of went on to The Howling, and when confronted with the screenplay, I think that it became apparent that we needed to rewrite it.
He said, well, if we can work on the script, you know, I'm in. So we hired a writer named Terrence Winkless. His adaptation was still fairly faithful to the book. And it really wasn't until John Sayles got involved that we pretty much just said, let's just throw out the book and do whatever we want.
I had previously worked with John Sayles on Piranha, which I think was his first screenplay.
The first draft was mostly based on the original novel, and then we decided to keep the basic premise of a modern-day werewolf and not use much of the rest of the novel. It just meant that I was kind of starting from scratch as far as the story was concerned, but not as far as the creature was concerned.
He would basically write most of the stuff on the plane from New York to LA. He was really fast. John was also working at the time on Alligator, and since both these pictures were really quite cheap, we would vie for who was going to pay to fly him out. Whenever you'd go to visit him, to, you know, to look at new pages and stuff, you'd knock on the door and say, who is it? You'd say who it was, and then you'd hear, you'd be taking the paper out of the typewriter and putting the other paper in because he was really working on the other guy's picture. At the time, he was really a find for low-budget movie producers because he was knowledgeable and he was smart, and he was a really good writer.
One of the things that I wanted to bring into, you know, The Howling was, you know, very often horror movies and science fiction movies have like a political bent. Well, I wanted to kind of do the same thing with psychology and this idea that, you know, the werewolf can be seen as a kind of metaphor for the id. You know, this is what the creature would do if we didn't put any brakes on him. I was a psych major, and so I had kind of, you know, had a look at various philosophies of helping people deal with psychological problems.
I didn't see him. I turned around, but I didn't see him.
There was a whole movement, starting in the late 60s, that would have you believe that the real problem always was repression.
Repression is the father of neurosis.
I was interested in having this kind of metaphor of these werewolves, of taking it the other way. Well, what if there was no repression? What if you just did whatever came to your mind?
Put her and her friend in a car, Pour gasoline over him, set fire to him, and push him off the coast road.
John's, real big contribution was the whole idea of doing this sort of satiric commentary on, at the time, self-help gurus and this guy that basically had this colony where all these werewolves were in therapy because they were obviously tortured by the fact that they were werewolves.
Well, the 70s were a time of getting in touch with your inner feel-good self, and there were a lot of movements coming on big.
I did it all. I did EST, TM, Scientology, Iridology, Primal Screamers.
There was, I thought, a lot of room for comment and parody on that kind of thing, as did John.
Screw all this channel your energies crap.
And the idea in The Howling of the Colony is basically a place where people with this social problem, which is that every once in a while they turn into werewolves or want to turn into werewolves, they find a way to cope.
There haven't been anywhere near as many werewolf movies as vampire movies, but it's the second most obviously popular horror character that isn't a fictional creation that's actually created from myth and lore.
By the time it came to do The Howling, there really hadn't been very many werewolf pictures. Werewolf movies were kind of considered old hat. It seemed like it would be more fun to try to take the myth into the 80s.
For a movie to take place today, it's ridiculous to think that people don't know what werewolves are or have never heard of werewolves. Of course they have, but from the movies. That's how we explain some of the rules of werewolves. We have it running on the TV.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
The guy who started the Wolfman stuff was a writer named Kurt Siodmak, who wrote the screenplay for the Wolfman in 1941. And he came up with a lot of lore about full moons and wolfbane and a whole bunch of stuff that became sort of accepted as the traditional stuff for werewolf movies.
How does it go? Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms. And the autumn moon is bright.
You find if you look at some of the pictures that the lore changes based on what budget the people had to work with.
That's just a legend, though, isn't it?
Yes, but like most legends, it must have some basis in fact.
The idea that if you get bitten by a werewolf, you become one yourself is the legitimate, quote-unquote, lore. Technically, I believe the way it works is that certain werewolves, like, alpha werewolves or whatever, can change at will. But if you're a victim, if you've been bitten by a werewolf, the full moon triggers it. Now, we got rid of that in The Howling because it didn't fit our purposes, because obviously the story would have had to have taken place over many months to have enough werewolf transformations. So we got rid of that by having Dick Miller, who is the expert in the movie, debunk that.
Hey, that's a lot of Hollywood baloney. Your classic werewolf can change shape anytime it wants, day or night, whenever it takes a notion to.
The rules that we went with is that, yes, if you are bitten by a werewolf, you will have this thing come over you. You will turn into a werewolf, but you can fight it. The other one was that you did need either to burn them or to kill them with something silver. That just a regular bullet was going to do some damage and knock them out, but they'd come back at you, and now they'd be annoyed because it hurt getting shot with that bullet.
Mostly the legends turn out to be psychological cases of people who had various problems, brain tumors and insanity and like that, and would do crazy things like, eat their kids and stuff.